If the Buccaneers want to compete in 2026, they have to be more aggressive than they have been the last 4 years this offseason. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. I am your host, James Yarcho, writer over at Bucs Report, covering the Buccaneers for over a decade, here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers, and for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. If you're a new customer, bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Some interesting names for the Buccaneers on the trade market, and we talk about Super Bowl 60. That is all coming up in a little bit. Kicking this one off with another mailbag question, this one from William, who said, do you think the Bucs will be aggressive in free agency? We really need good players on defense. William, that is a good question. And look, over the last couple of seasons, the Bucs have not been what I would call aggressive in free agency. They've gone for bargain signings, they've gone for upside, and to some degree, it's worked. You know, Baker Mayfield was a bargain signing that panned out. Ben Bredesen was another one. Riley Dixon, Chase McLaughlin, Greg Gaines. These aren't huge names with huge contracts outside of Baker Mayfield now, but they have panned out, and those guys have been rewarded appropriately. On the flip side, there have been some signings that didn't work so well. Hassan Reddick, Sua Opeta, Kendall Vildor, Mike Edwards, Ryan Neal, Jordan Whitehead, Bryce Hall, Chase Edmonds. These guys were low cost, high upside, and did not pan out. Now, of course, some of these were situational. Chase Edmonds, he got injured in training camp and was forced to miss an entire season. Mike Edwards, he was cut from one team. The Bucs brought him in because they needed the safety depth. Same thing with Ryan Neal. He was walking the streets. The Bucs needed depth there. You know, we were all excited when the Bucs brought back Whitehead because we were hoping that he'd be the same kind of player that he was when he was in Tampa the first time. That wasn't the case. Reddick, we were all hoping that he returned to the player that he was in Philly. Again, that wasn't the case. So how do we approach an offseason where you have like 99% of the offensive pieces that you need with a play caller that can take you back into the top 5 in the league in production and points scored, but you have needs at all 3 levels of the defense and have lacked a serious pass rush playmaker since the 2021 season? You have a head coach who has to win now, or will likely be fired along with most, if not all, of his staff. You've tried to get guys in the draft to address these needs. You aren't having a ton of success. What do? You have to go hard in free agency in the trade market, period. That is your option. You absolutely have to. I mentioned the other day that this window as of right now for the Bucs to compete is about 2 years. This has the same level of This has to be the same level of offseason that you saw from the Bucs in 2019 and 2020. That's how hard they need to go after some of these difference makers that are going to be on the market. And it's going to work again. I can promise you that. It will work again if they do it right. They will be right in the thick of it when it comes to that Lombardi trophy. You go back to the players they brought in 2019 and 2020. It started with Ndamukong Suh to solidify the front next to Vita Vea, taking a chance on a guy named Shaq Barrett who wasn't seeing the field enough in Denver. Rashad Perryman to provide depth at receiver. Bradley Pinion to improve their special teams unit. Then in 2020, you added Tom Brady, Rob Gronkowski, Leonard Fournette, Antonio Brown, while re-signing Suh and JPP and franchise tagging Shaq Barrett. Think of all of those key contributors that the Bucs brought in just 2 off seasons that helped them to a Super Bowl. These are not no-name guys. These were contributing players. But that's because they went for it. They went all in. Yeah, Shaq was a surprise, but they went hard for Suh and they went hard for Brady. Those were proven commodities that were going to cost some money, but you knew what you were getting. The approach has to be the same here. We've discussed it a few times. This team needs an alpha edge rusher, at least one, maybe two inside linebackers. You need a corner, a running back. You need depth on the offensive and defensive lines. You have to find a better interior offensive lineman that can step up in case of injury. You have to find an impact guy to either replace Logan Hall or that can step in and produce for Kalijah Kancey if and when he goes down with an injury. Maybe that person is one in the same. You're going to set yourself up in a much better position in the draft if you address most of these needs through free agency. This is not the time where the Bucs can afford to bargain hunt. One or two guys that may be a borderline starter or depth, depending on if they can outperform the other players ahead of them, but they can't do nothing but shop for deals. That's not the approach that they can take this time around. They have to spend on proven commodities that will improve this defense and allow Bowles to run the scheme that we've seen him run very successfully in Tampa in years past. This has to be taking a big swing on Crosby or Hendrickson or Mafe or Owe. This has to be taking a big swing on Quay Walker or Milano or Nakobe Dean at linebacker. They have gone down this road before, and it wasn't that long ago. We are coming up on the 5-year anniversary of that Super Bowl win, and they had to do their discount shopping and bargain hunting because of those years, because of the spending to compete for Super Bowls. Still maintain the Bucs should have gone back-to-back. Chris Godwin doesn't get his knee shredded, and Antonio Brown doesn't lose his mind. The Bucs beat the Rams, they then beat the Niners, and they beat the brakes off the Bengals. But in spite of all of that, in spite of the high spending in those years and then having to bargain hunt to get out from some of those void years and some of those contracts, the Bucs have continued to maintain a very solid roster. Now they have to look for the pieces that can put them over the top. And as good as this team is, because I believe overall it's a very good roster that woefully underperformed last year because of one thing or another. But as good as they are not great. Maybe one side of the ball can be great, but the other cannot. Not the way that they're constructed right now. And that's the side that your head coach is in charge of. That's his specialty. If you brought him back after the debacle last season, then you have to give him the pieces that he needs to get the job done. You can't make chicken salad out of chicken poop. So the Bucs are faced with a situation where if they don't go hard, if they don't spend big, if they don't take those risks right now, then what was the point? I will be sitting here asking, what was the point? Why would you bring back Bowles if you are not going to set him up for success? Why not just move on and start the rebuild? Because all you'll be doing is wasting another year from some of these guys while setting yourself up for a middle-of-the-road draft pick where you cannot get an elite guy at a position of need. You decided to bring back Todd. You decided that he was deserving of another year. So now you got to spend the money. And that you that I'm referring to, it could be the Glazers, it could be Jason Light, it could be a combination of the two. But now you have to invest in that decision. You go big or you go home. And if you don't get aggressive in free agency, if you don't go all in, then there are a lot of people in that building that are going to be going home and not coming back. There is absolutely no point in bringing back Todd Bowles and allowing him to continue to run this football team and run this defense if you're not going to give him the pieces that he needs to do it. And the pieces that he needs to do it, the pieces that have to be added to that defense to make it look like the 2020 and 2021 defenses are not going to come cheap. So if you weren't willing to write those checks, why would you bother to keep Todd Bowles? Why not just blow it up and start rebuilding? Some interesting proposals for the Bucs coming from one NFL writer. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Being a doctor you actually like can feel like discovering a diamond in the rough. Sure, you want someone who's in network nearby and has availability, but you also want a doctor who listens, makes you feel comfortable, and explains things clearly. That kind of doctor exists, and finding them is easy on ZocDoc. ZocDoc is a free app and website that helps you find and book high-quality in-network doctors so you can find someone you love without all the hassle. We're talking about booking in-network appointments with more than 150,000 providers across all 50 states, covering over 200 specialties from primary care and dentistry to dermatology and eye care. ZocDoc makes the process simple. You can search by specialty or symptoms and actually build a care team that works for you. You can see real-time availability, book instantly, no phone calls, no waiting on hold. So stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNFL to find and instantly book a doctor you love today. That's ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNFL, ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNFL. Thanks to ZocDoc for sponsoring this podcast. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. If you're hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. Indeed sponsored jobs helps your listing stand out and reach quality candidates faster, and they boost your post to the people who are the best match for your role, and that makes the real difference. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes with less stress, less time, more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't already, check out the Everydayer Club, the all-access tier. You get ad-free episodes, exclusive perks. Click the link in the show notes to get all the info you need. All right, Alex Ballentine of Bleacher Report went through and named every team's top trade targets in 2026. For what it's worth, he named Chris Godwin as a top trade target for the Cleveland Browns, which just honestly seems overly cruel and unnecessary to do to such a great person. Chris doesn't deserve that. No one deserves to get forced into going to Cleveland. But anyway, I digress. For the Bucs, he names linebacker Patrick Queen, edge rusher Rashan Gary, and tight end TJ Hockenson. Ballentine said, quote, "The Bucs have some cap space already, and that's before they do the typical cap gymnastics that every team does to create space. Given how wide open the NFC South was this season, they could get aggressive to push chips to the middle of the 2026 table. That could mean covering for the potential loss of Lombardi David. The 36-year-old linebacker is a prime candidate to retire, which would leave a hole in the middle of the Bucs defense. Patrick Queen would be a fun fit in Todd Bowles' blitz-heavy scheme. Tampa needs to get more dynamic on the edge, and Rashan Gary could use a change of scenery. The Packers brought in Micah Parsons in part because Gary didn't live up to his contract. However, there are only 2 years left on his deal, and it would be easy to manipulate the salary through an extension or adding void years. The Bucs also have an important decision with Cade Otton this offseason. He has posted over 1,100 receiving yards over the last 2 seasons, but he's set to hit free agency. Calling up the Vikings to see what the price for TJ Hockenson could be is an intriguing alternative, end quote. It's interesting that he would name Gary instead of Max Crosby, but, whatever. He listed Max Crosby for like 14 teams. Him and one of the guys from the Baltimore Ravens in their secondary. I can't remember who it is now, but anyway. So Gary would obviously be a much cheaper trade for the Bucs than Max Crosby would be, but would he provide the improvement that they need from that edge rush position? I say probably not. It would be some improvement over last year, but not the jump that they really need. Gary was drafted in the first round, 12th overall in 2019. He has never had double-digit sacks. He had 9.5 back in 2021. He had 9 in 2023, but then 7.5 in each of the last 2 years. And he's making $19.5 million this year and $22.5 million next year. You take all that into consideration, I'd rather go out and sign Trey Hendrickson for basically the same price with a higher likelihood that you're going to get double-digit sacks. So Rashan Gary, yeah, that's going to be a pass for me, Alex. Hockenson is an interesting one because he exploded onto the scene and then has really just kind of faded away the last couple of years. Now, maybe that's not entirely his fault when it comes to the 2025 season and how awful the quarterback play was in Minnesota for pretty much the entire season. Back-to-back seasons under 500 yards receiving and only 3 touchdowns over that same span. Since being drafted in 2019, he's only had one other season below 400 receiving yards, and that was his rookie year. He had over 900 receiving yards between 2 teams back in 2022. The 3 touchdowns last year is his 3rd lowest season total of his career, trailing only the goose egg that he had in 2024 and the 2 touchdown catches he had in his rookie season. Fewer receptions in 2024 and 2025 combined than he had in all of 2023. That's not a guy that's trending in the right direction. Now, again, to be fair, it may not be entirely on him. Now, I have not sat down and watched enough Vikings games to know for sure if it was the scheme or the quarterback or what the problem was. But quarterback wasn't a problem for the Vikes in 2024. In fact, their quarterback from 2024 is playing in the game that's this Sunday, and his numbers were still way down. Here's my issue. Yes, you are probably upgrading in terms of a pass catcher over Cade Otton, but it's another massive downgrade in blocking ability for a very expensive price. Not only would you have to give up draft capital to get him, but he carries a cap hit of $21.3 million this year and $23.3 million next year. For what? You're going to pay $20 million a year for less than 500 receiving yards and less than 5 touchdowns from a tight end that can't block? I honestly wouldn't be surprised if the Vikings cut him. They have an out this offseason that would land them a little under $12.5 million in dead cap, but that's still a heck of a lot cheaper than over $21 million for a tight end that hasn't produced since 2023. He is not worth that contract, and it's insane to pay someone that kind of money for 400 yards, less than 5 touchdowns, poor blocking. Again, hard pass, Alex. If you're interested in Hockenson, I can understand the attraction there, but let him get cut and then sign him for less than half of what he's supposed to get this season and next season. Then finally, Patrick Queen. This is one I would be interested in. Queen can play at a very high level, and his versatility would work really well in Todd Bowles' defense. Pro Bowls in 2 of the last 3 years, over 120 tackles in 3 consecutive seasons with 2 different teams. He's going to find a way to knock the ball loose, to make a key stop. That's the kind of player he is. I would love this move. Of course, that depends on compensation, but this is not a linebacker that you would bring in that would be blitzing a lot. He would not be in the Servassier Dennis, KJ Britt, Devin White role in this defense. This would legitimately be the Levante David replacement. That's not to say he would never blitz, because we saw Levante do that quite often, but they always picked the right spots for him to do it. This would be your guy that would read, react, sideline to sideline, the constant and steady in the middle of your defense that is always going to be reliable. I was a huge fan of Queen coming out of LSU. He was great in Baltimore. He's been great in Pittsburgh. He's got a cap hit of just over $17 million this season, but this is the final year of his contract. So this is a situation where you can trade for him, get that extension done, and then shift some of that cap hit for 2026 into future years by restructuring this current year as part of the extension. And then you have a little bit more cap space to continue working with. I'm not sure what it would take to get that kind of deal done. I would imagine that it's probably a mid-round pick of some sort. It might be the Bucs, sending a 3rd round pick in exchange for Patrick Queen and Baltimore 6th. It could be a 4th round pick for Queen and Baltimore's 2027 seventh. Yeah, it's not going to be a major blockbuster level trade. And if I was Jason Light, I would want to try to speak to his agent about an extension prior to making the move so that you're not just bringing in a rental. But if the Bucs go to the free agent pool for their edge rusher and then they still wanted to make a splash trade for an instant impact guy that upgrades this defense, this is one I can absolutely get behind. You know, we have to talk about Super Bowl 60. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. He knows your money goals better than you. Robinhood puts you in control of your money with tools that work as hard as you do. Locking in on every opening, beating your PER, beating it again, channel that drive into your money. Robinhood puts you in control. Trade stocks and ETFs, options, futures, and crypto all on one platform. You can now build and execute your own trades from a desktop with Robinhood Legends advanced tools. Or take advantage of the new Robinhood strategies with a tailored portfolio managed by a team of experts. You expect more from yourself, so expect more from your money. Get started today at Robinhood.com/yourmoney. Again, that's Robinhood.com/yourmoney. Your money, your move. As the new year gets going, a lot of people are trying to simplify their routines, and dinner is a big one. Between busy work days, cold winter nights, packed schedules, having an easy, reliable dinner plan makes a huge difference. That's where Home Chef comes in. Home Chef takes the stress out of cooking by delivering fresh, pre-portioned ingredients right to your door with easy-to-follow recipes that actually taste great. They're rated #1 by users of other meal kits for quality, convenience, value, taste, and recipe ease, and it's easy to see why. Home Chef was a game changer in my house. You get meals that come ready to fit your schedule, 30-minute recipes, oven-ready trays, quick lunches. I got one kid running off to hockey. I got another one running off to basketball and guitar lessons. This has taken so much stress off of our shoulders when we're all having to operate on different schedules. For a limited time, Home Chef is offering my listeners 50% off your first box, free shipping, and free dessert for life. Just go to homechef.com/locked on. That's homechef.com/locked on for 50% off your first box, free shipping, and free dessert for life. Must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert. Wrapping things up here on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. It is time, folks. It is time for Super Bowl 60. The Seattle Seahawks, the New England Patriots. Look, I'm actually looking forward to this game. And I figured since it's going to be a long time before we get to do this again, I would go ahead and drop some predictions. Just a reminder, Evan's predictions for this game were, his bold prediction was less than 14 total points at halftime. His player of the game was Kenneth Walker III, and his score, he took the Seahawks 24-10. For my bold, and look, obviously, I don't know these teams as well as I know the Bucs, but I feel like there are some things that you can predict that just generally don't happen in a Super Bowl as far as this bold prediction is concerned. The Seahawks defense is absolutely insane. Shout out Devin Witherspoon from the University of Illinois. From front to back, it really, truly is just outstanding. They have an incredible pass rush. They have ball hawks in the secondary, that complement that pass rush. I was really happy to see that Nick Emenwari, that was a safety that we talked about a lot during the draft process last year. He is good to go after suffering an injury during practice. So they have their full allotment of guys back there in the secondary. The big thing is here, will Drake May be on a mission to prove that he should have won the MVP and he's going to use this Super Bowl as his statement? Maybe, but against this defense, that's going to get him in trouble. So I see the pass rush being relentless, forcing May into some situations where he's probably going to make a couple of mistakes. And I know neither of these guys have ever been to a Super Bowl, when talking about the quarterbacks, but Darnold has seen some stuff in this league, and he's been through just about all you can be. May, he's still young. He's still learning. He's going to be great. He really is. It has surprised me how good he's been in just 2 years. The Patriots are going to be a problem for the league again. I I don't know if this stage is going to be something that he's ready for at this point in his career with the way the Seahawks defense flies around and creates chaos for opposing quarterbacks. So my bold here, give me the Seahawks defense with 4 takeaways. Player of the game, look, Evan took Kenneth Walker III. That makes a ton of sense. But how can you not go with Jackson Smith-Njigba? Offensive player of the year. He just hasn't been contained all season long. Now, in this game, he's going to go up against Christian Gonzalez and Carlton Davis. Okay, they couldn't contain Emeka Egbuka. They sure as heck aren't going to be able to contain Jackson Smith-Njigba. He's been the best receiver in the NFL all season long. He's been the guy that Darnold can always rely on to get to the sticks, to make the tough catch, to make a play when they need it the most. And that's what's gotten them to this point on the offensive side of the ball. I think we're going to see another massive performance from him, maybe even in the running for MVP if he just starts to take over, even though it's really hard for a receiver to get MVP over a quarterback. But we saw, in Super Bowl 56, we saw Odell Beckham Jr. well on his way to winning an MVP because of the kind of plays that he was making, and then he got hurt. If Jackson Smith-Njigba is taking a short pass and then all of a sudden breaking a tackle and going off for 60 yards down the field for a touchdown, if he puts Christian Gonzalez on skates and, ends up scoring a 40 or 50 yard touchdown down the field, he very well could win MVP. I expect over 100 yards from him, at least one, maybe even a pair of scores for JSN. Score prediction. Look, this is going to be a tough game for both teams. I know I was just hyping up JSN. I was talking about how good Seattle's defense is, but the Patriots defense is outstanding as well. We're talking about the 2 best scoring defenses in the NFL, so points are going to be at a premium. Mistakes are going to cost you. Both of these quarterbacks have looked outstanding for much of the season, but both of them are also privy to make a bad pass or two. It's all going to be about which team makes fewer mistakes and which team capitalizes on the mistakes that have been made. I think what Vrabel has done in just 1 year is absolutely incredible, but I also think that his stubbornness is going to be New England's undoing. And what I mean by that is we have seen all year that Travion Henderson is a monster of a running back, and he was by far the best running back on that team. He is the most productive. He has, been the most efficient. Yet the Patriots get to the playoffs, and it's back to all Ramondre Stevenson, while Henderson gets very little work, very limited snaps. Against Seattle, if you're not running the ball, controlling the clock, and wearing that defense down while having your biggest home run threat out there on the field, you're going to lose. And for Vrabel, that home run hitter is Travion Henderson, who he just, for whatever reason, refuses to give snaps to this postseason. So with that in consideration, I am taking the Seattle Seahawks to win this one 26-13. That is going to do it for this episode. Please check out everything going on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at JYarcho_Bucs, Instagram and TikTok at Locked On Bucs in both of those places. Make sure that you are following on YouTube with the notifications turned on, as well as wherever you get your podcasts. Become an Everydayer Club member, an all access tier member. Go to lockedonbucs.supercast.com or click the link in the show notes. Ad-free episodes, exclusive perks, discount at the merch store, daily newsletter, all those things. You're going to want to check it out. If you want to support the show, but you don't want to join the Everydayer Club, it's really, really simple. Like this episode on YouTube, leave a 5-star review wherever you get podcasts. It does help other Buccaneers fans find the show. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, enjoy the Super Bowl, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.